who have not themselves come. But I do think, my sense from talking to the ministers certainly, and I know the Sherpas are in touch with each other. They are right now trying to hammer out the final document. I think everybody is coming with a great deal of seriousness. I mean,
will it have an impact on the outcome of the meet?
I would put it this way, that the issues are there. These are not issues that are this morning being taken up. I mean, there's a whole gestation period of 8-9 months where at different levels ministers or officials have tried to progress an issue. So this is like a culmination. These are really about 16-18 processes which are all coming together to be stitched up together to produce a summit.
So Russia and China are not really miffed with India, and is that the reason?
No. I don't think it has anything to do with India. I mean, I think whatever decision they make, I mean, they would know best, but I would not at all see it the way you would suggest.
And it's not going to have an impact on the declaration itself is a complicated procedure to arrive at a consensus to have a declaration. So are we moving towards it? Are the countries moving towards that?
Well, we are negotiating right now. As I said, the negotiation is not the clock did not start ticking yesterday. The clock has been ticking for some time. So typically what happens is there's a ministerial meeting. Then the ministerial meeting produces outcomes. I'll give you an example.
Okay.
I chaired the development ministers meeting. Okay. So when we did the development ministers meeting, there was an agreed, all 20 countries agreed that there should be an action plan to speed up the sustainable development goals achievement. All 20 countries agreed that we should have high principles for environmentally friendly lifestyle. So now if these have been already approved, either they get attached or some part of it in some summary form comes into the document. So everyone, the labor, the education, the finance is a very, very important track. I mean,
correct.
That's a very crucial track, because in a way that's where the whole thing began, the G20 exercise began. So every track feeds in outcomes. These are, some of them have multiple meetings like finance, some of them have a single meeting. So these outcomes are melded together and they produce a composite document. In addition, there are things which may be discussed among the Sherpas, or the leaders may also discuss some things among themselves.
These meetings have been going on since the beginning of this year.
Right.
But is there a consensus building, and what will India see as the host? What will India see as a win-win situation?
Well, I don't think it's just a matter of India seeing something. Today, the expectations of the world are very high in terms of what the G20 is able to produce, and produce in terms of meeting the challenges of the world. So if you were to go to Africa, we go to Latin America, go to parts of Asia, go to the Caribbean, go to the Pacific, everybody is today saying, okay, I have a certain set of issues. I have a debt problem, I have a trade problem, I have a health access problem, I have a green development resourcing problem. So what will the G20 do for me? So the world is waiting. So the world is waiting, or today I see it more for India as a responsibility, that we have the responsibility today in a very difficult world. It is difficult in terms of the COVID impact, difficult in terms of the conflict impact, in terms of the climate impact, in terms of debt. That's one part of it. But it's also difficult politically. There is a very sharp north-south divide. There's an even sharper east-west polarization. So how do you bring people together? How do you find common ground? How do you make everybody understand that we all have a bigger responsibility? And therefore, please can we kind of get our act together here and do what is right by the world.
As a former diplomat and now as an external affairs minister, I guess that's right up your alley to find common ground.
Well, everybody's worked and is working on it. There's every minister, we have about 15 ministerial tracks. Every minister has put in their best. The Sherpa and his team have worked and are working very hard. So it's a collective effort.
Sure. Right. You've just come back from BRICS. Yeah. You're heading for the ASEAN Summit, East Asia
this
Summit.
Evening.
Yeah. So that's the East Asia Summit, and then is the G20. It's a packed schedule. You spoke about Global South. You spoke about the divide between the East and West, between the North and South, and trying to find common ground. Do these countries see India as a voice? You said represent the Global South. Do these countries who are participating in these fora, do they see India as a credible voice within the fora?
The Global South countries? Yes. I would certainly hope so for this reason. There have been G20 summits before. No other G20 presidency made an effort to get together the developing countries who are not on the table and say, please come sit with us, tell us what are your concerns, and we will distill those concerns and place it before the G20. That's a very unique exercise. Nobody has done it before. So if we have taken the trouble, and we meaning here Prime Minister Modi himself, if 125 countries have been consulted, feel today, yes, what we told India has promised us that they will put that issue on the table. I think they have a lot of expectation of India. And as far as the rest of the G20 is concerned, they know that, look, we have always in G20, outside the G20, India has a reputation of being a very constructive player, someone who bridges divides, who kind of somewhere helps to fix problems. So there's a lot of goodwill that we have, and again, I stress to you, I am confident that every one of the G20 coming to Delhi will understand the responsibility that they bear, will understand today that the other 180 countries of the world are looking to them to set directions, and that they cannot afford to fail them.
Do these countries at any point of time feel that India has shifted its position, is leaning more towards the US than it used to? I know I sound like a dinosaur, but let me hark back on the non-aligned movement period when we were considered absolutely, not leaning, and if at all leaning, then more towards the Soviet bloc, the former Soviet bloc. Do they see us leaning more towards the US now?
No, I hate to confirm to you that you are being old-fashioned here. That it's really, I think, a very anachronistic way of looking at the world today. I think a lot of countries identify with India as a developing country. A lot of countries identify with India as a democracy. Many identify with India saying, okay, it's a pluralistic country, we see many institutional, cultural similarities. So different people in the world identify with us. But do understand this point, G20 is not the arena for power politics. I accept, I'm very, very conscious that diplomacy and international relations is a very competitive exercise. But even in diplomacy, there are occasions when you are competitive, there are occasions when you are cooperative. G20 is very much a collaborative forum. It is even countries who differ profoundly on many other issues, but their history, if you look at it, in G20 is to find something which brings them together. So we are trying to develop an agenda that if you look at resources for green development, for example, if you look at dealing with sustainable growth, if you are looking at plastics, if you are looking at biofuels, if you are looking at educational access, at nutrition, these should not be, and I don't think these are political issues. So what India's strategic calculations and adjustments may be, I think, is a different subject.
But I've covered G20s earlier, and whenever there's a summit meeting, the presence of the American president kind of overshadows the other heads of state, and it can be something very small like the cavalcade going, and then everybody is made to wait for the US president to go forward. So do you think that the fact that President Biden is going to be here for 3 days in India, is that going to impact on the other countries feeling that India as a host country is again paying too much attention?
No, I just think you're going on a wrong track here. I think you will see that everybody will come in smoothly, nobody will have to wait for anybody else. For us the G20 is a collective exercise. We will deal with it in that collective side.
It's not just the bandobast I'm talking about.
We are India. We are India. We know how to handle the world. And believe me, especially in the last 10 years, we have shown how we can handle the world.
I will also ask you whether, we were talking about the declaration, and the Russian foreign minister was pretty belligerent, saying that they wanted their view on the Ukraine crisis to be included in the declaration. Don't you see that muscle flexing has begun even before the summit?
That may be the way you would characterize it. I mean, for me, anybody would try to put across their national position, try to maximize their negotiating position, if you would. I think you should wait and see what actually happens in the negotiation, not prejudge it purely in terms of what may be said on one occasion and what may be the media interpretation of what was said on one occasion.
President Biden's visit, what on the bilateral level, what is going to be on the table, if you could tell us, because there's talk about nuclear reactors, visa issues coming up. What could be on the agenda?
Well, we've had a very strong state visit by the Prime Minister to the United States, strong in terms of the outcomes and the results of that visit. My understanding is right now both systems, the Indian system and the American system, is busy working that through and trying to implement a lot of what was agreed to in June this year. I think this would give an occasion for the leaders to take stock.
Post-COVID and post-Ukraine conflict, foreign policy analysts feel that there's this arc of cooperation and arc of alliance between Russia and China, and that influences most forums, whether it was at the BRICS, you heard about de-dollarization and stuff like that coming out. And do you think that will cast a shadow on all these international meets?
No, I think often arguments can be overstated, sometimes deliberately so, for a purpose. Okay. Since you refer to BRICS, let me give you the example of BRICS. We had the 5 BRICS members, a perfectly congenial, obviously a very detailed exchange about what, how to take BRICS forward, of which membership expansion was one. Even when you speak about currency, frankly, a lot of the focus was really about how to use our national currencies, which many of us want to do and are capable of doing today. We may not have been in that situation, a decade ago. I would say, do not see the world very starkly in terms of black and white and this camp and that camp. I'm not saying that countries don't have their partialities and their relationships. They do. But I think the world is a much more nuanced place. It's much more multipolar. There are many more variables. A large part, even say again in BRICS, would have been, what are the views of South Africa? What does Brazil think? How, where is India going? And then you find some kind of landing point. I mean, if you look even at last year's BRICS, I mean, there were a whole lot of countries. You can broadly call them countries in the middle, and Indonesia and India, Turkey, South Africa, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, who who all had their views and did what they could really to arrive at a consensus. And I think
to what do you attribute this this change, where you saying that there is multipolarity and they're finding a voice to speak in spite, and it's not stark like what you're saying?
Because I think over the last many years, especially maybe over the last decade, perhaps a little bit more, the relative economic weight of countries have changed. The relative political confidence of countries have changed. The relationships, especially of the major powers and the middle powers, has changed. So if you looked at it earlier on, it was like very tight groupings and let us say particularly in the Western world, a very strong alliance structure. Today I think the world architecture has opened out very much more. So you have many more independent countries. They could be independent at a global level or a regional level or even in the neighborhood level. I think the world is changing, and the G20 itself is actually the best statement of it. That there was a time, after all, we left everything to the G7. Today the fact that you have G20, I mean G20 is today seen as the premier global forum. After all, just think in the last year, compare the G20 meeting to anything else which has happened, a NATO meeting, I don't know, a SCO meeting, a BRICS meeting, a Quad meeting, a UN meeting. Nothing has evoked the kind of attention and focus that a G20 meeting has, because the world recognizes today that this gathering has a very exceptional importance.
Is that the reason, or is it because you made it into such a big thing? I mean, everybody is talking about it. Even the Indian opposition says that it was earlier, the summit meetings used to be done in a very quiet manner, very classy manner in Vigyan Bhavan, in Lutyens, Delhi, and now the BJP has made this into this big thing, not sticking to one city, going to several cities. Whose plan was this, and was it? Did you take other G20 nations in the?
See, if somebody felt that they were most comfortable in Lutyens, Delhi, or completely comfortable in Vigyan Bhavan, that's their prerogative. That was their world. So yes, you have had summit meetings where the impact of the country probably went 2 kilometers on a good day out of Vigyan Bhavan. This is a different government, it's a different era, it's a different thought process. A Prime Minister felt, and all of us have worked in that direction, that the G20 is something which should be treated as a national endeavor, that different parts of India must have a sense of participation, and that this is something which has been truly, I would say, non-partisan. If you look actually at the G20 events, a lot of it were held in states which are not ruled by BJP governments. They are ruled by governments in the opposition. And you can see the result. I mean, to me, one of the big pluses of the G20 is really how much more interested the people of India, especially the young people of India, have got in foreign policy, and they need it, because look, this is a globalized era. This is an era where the opportunities can be very global, where the problems also, as we saw during COVID, can be global. So we need to, as part of the transformation of India, we need to create a global awareness in this country, and I think the G20 has been very, very helpful in it. And for those who feel that we should be stuck in 1983, I mean, please, you are welcome to be stuck in 1983. I'm sorry, the country has moved on. We are in 2023.
This people's participation, which has become really the hallmark of this G20, it was very unlike. I've been to the Bali meet, which was restricted in.
I've been to the last 10 G20s, and I can vouch for it. Yeah, sure.
I've been to the G20 in London too. It was not. It wasn't everywhere.
I didn't do that.
That was the one President Obama was there. Right. So anyway, to get back to this, it's become a people's movement, and that's also the hallmark of the foreign policy initiatives that your government has taken, is taking it out of the corridors of Ministry of External Affairs to the people, demystifying foreign policy to a large extent. Is that a political need? Is that something that your government decided to do that? Why did you take G20 out?
Two reasons. One, I think it's fundamentally a mindset. It's a mindset of the Prime Minister, it's a mindset of the BJP, it's a mindset of the government. And the mindset is a more democratic mindset, a mindset where you feel it should not be a small clique in one city which controls everything, so it is by me, for me, about me, which we felt was the way it has happened in the past. So, and in that sense, the whole idea is to democratize the G20, to make it much more participative, to give different cities, different states, different professions and generations a sense of participation and ownership. So, one part of, and this is not restricted to the G20. It is a larger mindset. I mean, it could be in terms of today how you elect or select your political leaders. It could be about how economic benefits and social benefits are given. It could be about educational access, health access. I think the country in the last 10 years has become much more democratized. That it isn't in the capital, it isn't only in the metropolitan cities, it isn't only even in the big cities. You've taken it out. You've taken out anything good which has happened in this country has been taken out to the entirety of this country. So that is one reason. The other reason is what I told you, which is it's absolutely essential that today's India must develop sharper global awareness. Global awareness, because we do see, when Prime Minister speaks about Amrit Kal, that we have this 25 years where enormous possibilities are there before us, but those possibilities are realizable only when you understand the world.
Right. So, India is occupying a prominent place at high tables, whether it was at BRICS, you're going to Jakarta there at the Asia Summit, and then at G20. By doing this, we are discussing issues for global issues, what matters to countries of the South and everywhere. But the opposition says that you have lost focus on our neighborhood. Even though you have a neighborhood first policy, relations with Pakistan has taken a downturn. China, you yourself said we have abnormal relations. Has focus shifted by us looking at the big picture?
So why don't you ask people in Sri Lanka? What do they think about the neighborhood? Why don't you ask people in Bangladesh? Why don't you ask people in Bhutan and Nepal? Do they feel that today India is doing more? Is India more reliable? Is India more relevant? You will get a very different answer. Now, if somebody says that the proof of a good foreign policy is to carry on with Pakistan as though a big terrorist strike hasn't happened and that's par for the course, then I'm sorry, they have a different worldview. That's not the kind of neighborhood first policy that we are running.
And at the G20, you will be speaking about the neighborhood too?
No, the G20 is about global. Look, do understand, the G20 is not an international peace and security forum. The G20 is about global growth and development. So we will be taking a global economic sort of perspective.
So now the latest issue about G20 is the invitation card which says Bharat and not India. Now that is the latest thing, that is G20 going to reposition India as Bharat and not India as India?
No, India, that is Bharat. It is there in the constitution. Please, I would invite everybody to read it.
So it's not something which is new, it is something which existed in the constitution, and so you didn't do, it's not a new roll of dice.
No, I think when you say Bharat, in a sense a meaning and a understanding and a connotation that comes with it, and that is reflected in our constitution as well.
Right. So, in conclusion, I just want to ask you, in one of the interviews recently, you said that when the Chandrayaan happened and you were in Johannesburg, there are people who came to the Prime Minister and said that what India has achieved is like our achievement too. So, why do you think that happened?
I would say it happened partly because we are able to evoke a very strong sense of global solidarity. That the feeling is in many ways that people empathize with us. They feel okay, if we are doing well, somewhere it gives them satisfaction. They feel a connect with us. Why do they feel that connect with us? Maybe it's also our record. It was multiple leaders, because in fact I remember saying in public that Prime Minister actually had to walk the entire room because everybody stood up and wanted to shake hands with him and to congratulate him. But part of it is also, if you look at the last 10 years, people see that it could be COVID, it could be as in the case of Sri Lanka, their economic distress, it could be what happened when natural disasters. That sense today that here is a country with a large heart, which is willing to put its capabilities forward. And I would say today, the fact that we have got the right balance between national interest and international responsibilities, that is one of the successes, I would say, of our foreign policy. That how do you actually get both? And the neighborhood is a very good example. That is a good example of our national interest, but it is also a very good example of how our neighbors have benefited from the prosperity and the capability of India.
I hope I can interview you before the general elections, but just in conclusion, tell me, usually just before general election, the year before general elections, foreign policy goes to the back burner and everybody just kind of relaxes in the Ministry of External Affairs. But you are hosting the G20, you're going for the East Asia Summit, you've just done BRICS, the Prime Minister doesn't seem to be putting foreign policy on the back burner, and even a US presidential visit before their election, that itself is something which is we've not seen that before. Usually they just it becomes domestic issues always, isn't it?
So that's the point I've been trying to get across to you. It's a different world, it's a different India, it's a different Prime Minister, it's a different government. And that's why you have all that you say you haven't seen in the past.
Right. Thank you so much, sir, for your time, and wishing you all the best for the G20.
Thank you. Pleasure as always.
Repeatedly said, India is the voice of the global south. We want to push for a more inclusive and equitable growth. There's been a lot of talk about India's transformational digitization as well, showing the way to other countries. As the IT minister of the country who's been greatly involved with India's G20 presidency, let me ask you this. How do you think India is really showing the way in this arena?
I think one of the defining attributes of this presidency by India is that for example, in the whole digital economy space, we have, with our own experience over the last 9 years of building these DPIs, this digital infrastructure, that we are showing how technology can be harnessed by governments in a way that is not very expensive, is not very backbreaking, and achieves the objectives of inclusion, brings more and more people into the framework of governance and benefits and pensions and money and subsidies. And so the DPI story that India today represents at scale, with 1 billion Indians using the DPI that have been constructed by the government, is certainly a beacon for all those countries, including the countries of the global south, that have lagged behind in digital technologies because they thought it's very expensive, that they had to go to big technology companies of the world to digitize their own economies and government. And here India is saying, look, there has to be a partnership and a coalition of countries, and we create a global DPI repository where all of this technology and innovation is made available to anybody who wants it free of cost. And so India has taken a lead in that. India has shown the world, and today we have, as India, we have signed 8 MOUs with 8 different countries to implement the India DPI in their countries and allow them to grow and digitize and expand and innovate. So there is no doubt in my mind in the technology space. And remember, we are talking about this in the backdrop of a mission to the moon, successful mission to the moon, and almost 5 days later a mission to the sun. Very few countries today, including in the G20, can boast of that kind of a backdrop and have a communication and conversation about technology as India can. So there is nothing remotely abstract about India's conversations about technology, digital skills or cyber security. These are very real, backed by very real products and applications, innovations, which India and our Prime Minister are saying we are offering to the world free of cost for their own development and for the progress of people even outside of India.
Yeah. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but the National Payments Corporation of India announced recently that the UPI transactions crossed the 10 billion mark in August.
Absolutely.
You speak very passionately about DPI, India's digital public infrastructure. Why do you believe DPI is the fulcrum of the India story? And how exactly is India helping other countries change or transform their own trajectory using this as the foundation?
Neha, I'll tell you why it's such a very important part of the India story, this new India story. When you talk about India today, of course, you talk about 23rd August and you talk about Chandrayaan and you talk about the Aditya L1. But if you talk about a deeper story which most countries relate to, is the story how a country of this size and scale, which for several decades the narrative of dysfunctional governance, where 100 rupees left Delhi and 15 rupees by the admission of a Prime Minister of that time, only 15 rupees reached the beneficiary because of corruption, because of leakage. That India, that story of India of great potential but immense dysfunctionality, which lasted for 6.5 decades, has been transformed simply because of Prime Minister Modi's vision of the power of DPI and power of technology. And so that story is, and that reality today when it is communicated to countries that say, even we have people far away from state capitals. We have people far away and distant from governance institutions. How do we reach them? The DPI is the answer to connecting back governments and citizens in a very foolproof manner, rebuilding trust and between government and citizen in a very strong, robust manner, as India has shown. Whether it is Aadhaar, the identity layer, UPI, the payment layer, DigiLocker, the document authentication layer, eSanjeevani, the health layer, the skill layer, the education layer. So we have built a whole proliferation of applications and technology that allows citizens to avail public services and public benefits in a way that is unprecedented. And it is
repeatedly said India is the voice of the global south. We want to push for a more inclusive and equitable growth. There's been a lot of talk about India's transformational digitization as well, showing the way to other countries. As the IT minister of the country who's been greatly involved with India's G20 presidency, let me ask you this. How do you think India is really showing the way in this arena?
I think one of the defining attributes of this presidency by India is that for example, in the whole digital economy space, we have, with our own experience over the last 9 years of building these DPIs, this digital infrastructure, that we are showing how technology can be harnessed by governments in a way that is not very expensive, is not very backbreaking, and achieves the objectives of inclusion, brings more and more people into the framework of governance and benefits and pensions and money and subsidies. And so the DPI story that India today represents at scale, with 1 billion Indians using the DPI that have been constructed by the government, is certainly a beacon for all those countries, including the countries of the global south that have lagged behind in digital technologies because they thought it's very expensive, that they had to go to big technology companies of the world to digitize their own economies and government. And here India is saying, look, there has to be a partnership and a coalition of countries, and we create a global DPI repository where all of this technology and innovation is made available to anybody who wants it free of cost. And so India has taken a lead in that. India has shown the world, and today we have, as India, we have signed 8 MOUs with 8 different countries to implement the India DPI in their countries and allow them to grow and digitize and expand and innovate. So there is no doubt in my mind in the technology space. And remember, we are talking about this in the backdrop of a mission to the moon, successful mission to the moon, and almost 5 days later a mission to the sun.
Correct.
Very few countries today, including in the G20, can boast of that kind of a backdrop and have a communication and conversation about technology as India can. So there is nothing remotely abstract about India's conversations about technology, digital skills or cyber security. These are very real, backed by very real products and applications, innovations, which India and our Prime Minister are saying we are offering to the world free of cost for their own development and for the progress of people even outside of India.
Yeah. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but the National Payments Corporation of India announced recently that the UPI transactions crossed the 10 billion mark in August.
Absolutely.
You speak very passionately about DPI,
Yes.
India's digital public infrastructure. Why do you believe DPI is the fulcrum of the India story? And how exactly is India helping other countries change or transform their own trajectory using this as the foundation?
Neha, I'll tell you why it's such a very important part of the India story, this new India story. When you talk about India today, of course, you talk about 23rd August and you talk about Chandrayaan and you talk about the Aditya L1. But if you talk about a deeper story which most countries relate to, is the story how a country of this size and scale, which for several decades the narrative of dysfunctional governance, where 100 rupees left Delhi and 15 rupees by the admission of a Prime Minister of that time, only 15 rupees reached the beneficiary because of corruption, because of leakage. That India, that story of India of great potential but immense dysfunctionality, which lasted for 6.5 decades, has been transformed simply because of Prime Minister Modi's vision of the power of DPI and power of technology. And so that story is, and that reality today when it is communicated to countries that say, even we have people far away from state capitals, we have people far away and distant from governance institutions, how do we reach them? The DPI is the answer to connecting back governments and citizens in a very foolproof manner, rebuilding trust and between government and citizen in a very strong, robust manner, as India has shown. Whether it is Aadhaar, the identity layer, UPI, the payment layer, DigiLocker, the document authentication layer, eSanjeevani, the health layer, the skill layer, the education layer. So we have built a whole proliferation of applications and technology that allows citizens to avail public services and public benefits in a way that is unprecedented. And it is particularly relevant to India because in the context of India, because for 6.5 decades, people all around the world looked at India and said, "Ye to ek dysfunctional democracy hai. Great people, great country, great culture, great heritage, but the system just doesn't work because it's so corroded and corrupted." And that has been turned on its head 180 degrees through the power of DPI. So therefore, there is a lot of real acknowledgement of the change of India and this changed India. And I see that as something in every meeting that I have with any of these ministers, that they see India as a case study of what can be changed and what can be the potential of a country.
And it's heartening to know, like you said, 8 MOUs have been signed with other countries. Of course, you have said recently that DPI is a force whose time has come and it is unstoppable. I need to ask you one more question about G20 before we move on. Just looking at the big picture, I know you don't want to comment on geopolitics. What do you think India's G20 legacy is likely to be? How's the world likely to remember it?
Look, again, I speak as an individual citizen of India and the world. Look, I see that the traditional values of India, which really had been for many years ignored by the supremacy, let us say, or dominance of Western ideals and Western values. And for many years, the Asian values of family, Asian values of sustainability, India's values of culture, heritage and modernity all being balanced. I think that is all now coming back to center stage. As the West moves to more on discourse of sustainability, effectively that is the language that Indian culture and tradition has been speaking for years. This balance between the planet we live on and the planet that we exploit. So, I hope, it is my fond hope that we will move into the coming decade with a lot more of a heightened awareness of a lot of these values that India espouses. Development and progress, not conflict. Technology for empowerment of people and not just for exploitation. Inclusion, not exclusion. Not a bipolar or a unipolar world, but multipolar world. So all of these things I think are things that I hope the world moves towards. And I'm not saying this in the context of G20, I say this only as a generally interested citizen who also cares deeply about not just my country and my city and my town and my state, but also that we live in a very connected world where progress in any one country cannot be to the exclusion of another country, and that we can look to a much more peaceful, much more sustainable world order going forward, and not a lot less conflict and a lot more positivity and a lot more positive thought.
We all need that in the wake of the COVID pandemic and the Russia-Ukraine war. That is exactly what the world needs. Mr. Minister, I know you have to go, but I just want to ask you last one or two questions that are directly relevant to your ministry very quickly. Concerns about the data protection law. It is being said that citizens' privacy might be in jeopardy. The government probably has unbridled powers to access and use our data. How would you address those concerns very quickly?
Look, the only response is please do read it. And before jumping around with these characterizations, it is an absolutely well drafted protection that at the heart of it protects the citizens' rights to privacy and gives a framework of guardrails that protects the citizens' rights without any ambiguity. And if there are any exceptional powers given to the government, these are powers to be used and exercised during emergencies like national security emergencies, a pandemic and natural disaster. I have to go. I have a meeting.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Minister, for making the time. Thank you very much.
Over here it says Delhi gets 400 new e-buses, fleet strength goes up to 800. It's really great that the G20 is happening over here, and the Delhi's bus fleet has also been taken care of. But people are already worried about what is going to happen in these 3 days. People who are living in the national capital, in Lajpat Nagar, in various areas in and around the peripheries of Lutyens, Delhi, what is going to happen? On the other hand, illuminating dark spots, more CCTVs, security has been beefed up at the metros and the railway stations. There is going to be proper crowd control, ladies and gentlemen, and they've been readied as the city is on alert. Animal NGO protests, ways dogs have been rounded up. The MCD has rejected those charges. A lot of people are saying that a lot of dogs
also
have been
yesterday there was
process.
Yesterday there was a surprise G20 drill by the Delhi police that resulted in huge traffic jams, especially
but the city has certainly come to life, hasn't it, Varghese? I don't know if
it's come
Delhi.
to
We've got those visuals. Let's throw them up there because the city has completely been decked up.
It's been completely transformed.
So
it's been
beautiful.
beautified. Yes, these are the visuals I was talking about in the night on that.
And that's the theme of G20: One Earth, One Family, One Future. Vasudeva Kutumbakam, which is what the Prime Minister was also talking about when he gave that exclusive interview to the Press Trust of India.
Well, but G20 is supposed to be one of the key highlights of his government's program for this particular term of his prime ministership, and he has been focusing on it for almost 2 years. He has been having several of those side meetings of G20 also planned out. But Kabir, let's come to the serious business now. We know that Biden, there was a scare, of course, with Jill Biden being tested COVID positive, whether Biden will be able to, in fact, attend or not. But then you have the Chinese, president also skipping it. But at the end of the day, no matter what the politics is that's happening on that front, it looks like Deliads have been given.
Xi Jinping is going to miss out on all of this, Varghese.
All
of the beautiful,
whatever the politics,
taking up of the national capital,
whatever
Xi
the
Jinping is going to miss it out.
Whatever the international politics would be, I think Delhi, at the end of the day, the people of Delhi have benefited from this meeting being in Delhi, because it just beautified the city really, really well. Delhi looks really good now. Delhi has, it's that great thing about showcasing your capital. It's been beautified in certain places.
That was the Pragati Maidan Convention Center. If you if you missed that out, did you look at the interiors? How magnificent the entire hall looks like. Take a look at that. It's got a weird new look to it, and I can of course see the architectural inspiration that has been taken from the emblem as well.
If you look at the interior design of that structure, it has also phenomenal. There have been aspects of trying to make it look more of a postmodern, but at the same time having that Indian ethos as well. So that's the kind of interior design that we have seen over here. But the fact remains is that Delhi, a lot of places that were having these dark spots, they have been cleared. International summits like this happening in Delhi has resulted in Delhi actually being completely beautified. It's become, certain areas of the city have been completely transformed with fountains, with, small gardens, turnabouts. Everything has been transformed in and around Delhi, and it's a completely transformed city that we see for the G20 summit. As I told you before, the beautification is great. I hope after the meet, they don't uglify it.
Well, absolutely. And the first guest arrives, Nigerian President Bola Ahmed Tinubu is in New Delhi yesterday. Tinubu, the first head of delegation to arrive for the G20 summit, was received by the MOS Health SP Singh Baghel at the airport. The MES spokesperson Arindam Bagchi tweeted that this is the Nigerian president's first visit to India since he assumed office. But that's not all. At the same time, the summit is going to keep the Delhi's airspace busy as well. A lot of people have been asking me whether, they can fly in during the G20 summit. Can they fly out during the G20 summit? How does that happen? In case your flight does land, what way do you take to different parts of the national capital region? Is something people are already talking about. And airlines have been given the options to reschedule as well. So there's going to be a lot of rescheduling, which is why the government also put out plans way well in advance so that people couldn't, plan out their travel accordingly. But coming to away from all the street art, away from all the decking up, away from all the facilities that New Delhi will have to offer, and the beauty that New Delhi will have to offer for the G20 summit. Apart from all of that, Varghese, coming to the diplomatic end, Joe Biden. Joe Biden is something that you spoke about. Now I'm reading here, it says, Jill Biden tests positive for COVID-19. United States President tests negative. United States First Lady Jill Biden has tested positive for COVID-19 just days before President Joe Biden, who tested negative for the virus, is due to travel for a group of G20 summit in India. The White House said on Monday that Biden's 72-year-old wife, whose symptoms were described as mild, last had COVID in August of last year. All that being said, it seems like Joe Biden is definitely on his way to the G20 summit. Xi Jinping might not be attending it. But Joe Biden is.
So Joe Biden will be attending it, of course, and also the deepening ties between India and US is at focus over here, Kabir. You see how US as well as India has come a long way from the Cold War era. They are sharing technology, they are sharing tech trade, they are ready to trust each other, especially when it comes to sensitive technology. They are ready to go ahead and ensure that they would be able to get some kind of an effort to ensure that it is co-development that is there. So all these aspects are being looked into. So I think one of the factors that we need to in fact look at it is that when it comes to the United States, they have gone a long way trying to become India's partner, and it's been a realization for the United States that India is the only democracy they can trust in the Asian region, especially in the South Asian region, because the rest of them have their own issues in that region. We are the only democracy they can trust. Of course, you have South Korea as well as Japan on the other side, but when it comes to Asia, this is the challenge that they are looking at, and the assertiveness of the Chinese, especially in the Asian region, is becoming a concern not only for the US, it is also a concern for India, several Southeast Asian nations as well.
Well, it also says here that this is going to be a chance to build joint responses to global challenges, this coming in from France. What about Emmanuel Macron? Is he going to be in attendance? I mean, now that we know that Joe Biden is definitely going to be on his way.
As of now,
Jake Sullivan has also touched upon, the India-China angle and ties affecting the G20 summit as well.
Well, they have raised that figure, because I think, before coming to the show, we were discussing about how China is the big issue in the G20 summit. China has been raising the issue about its maps. China has been assertive on the Taiwan front, and just ahead of the G20, you have that map controversy coming up. The BRICS summit, apparently there was a talk about disengaging, but we don't know how much of that talk actually did play out. And then in the G20 also, we have this complication with regards to the presence of Russia, especially as the Ukraine war is also going on. So all these factors are being looked into at this G20 summit. So we must in fact see as to Chinese presence being part of all this. But yes, the border tensions seem to have rubbed it off on the G20 summit, especially with President Xi going ahead and skipping it and letting the Premier attend it.
Pakistan is actually genociding Baloch people. So being Baloch is a crime. If you are a Baloch, it means in the eyes of Pakistan, you don't have any right to live.
The Chinese and Pakistanis are colonizing the Baloch and exploiting their resources.
The Baloch armed struggle will continue unless China withdraws, Pakistan military withdraws from Balochistan, and give Baloch complete authority to decide for themselves.
The Baloch feel that if they don't act now, they will become marginalized.